Hello, lovely folks of YouTube. Ren here. I want to talk about this plant right behind me. This is a very, very classic garden plant that not many people know actually has some magical associations with it. If you recognize it, good for you. If you don't, what I'm talking about is the peony. Peony is the name that we refer to any plants that are in the genus Paeonia. There are give or take 30-some species of peonies out there. They can all fall into three basic classifications. The three classifications are herbaceous peonies. Those are the peonies that will die down all the way to the ground every winter. The woody or tree peonies, they actually have some stems that will kind of withstand the winter and will keep getting taller year after year. And then of course finally there is the Ito or intersectional peony, which is actually a hybrid between the two. That's named after the botanist who originally hybridized them, Toichi Ito. So this plant has been cultivated for thousands of years. Probably has a history of cultivation that rivals the rose, which is another one of our oldest garden flowers. Unlike the rose, this plant is actually ridiculously long-lived. Roses can live a good long time, but usually, you know, only like 30-40 years. There have been rootstocks of peonies that have been known to live for hundreds of years. My particular peony behind me is a Festiva maxima, which is an herbaceous peony. This plant was taken from the rootstock of a plant that had been planted by my mother's next door neighbor in 1955. That's how old that plant is. So yeah, it's getting up there. It's getting up there. Obviously, root divisions are the best way to get new peonies. If you know someone who has peonies, they can probably divide them for you. Peonies don't necessarily need to be divided, unlike a lot of other clump-forming perennials, but you can divide them in order to propagate them. And of course, if you don't have anyone that owns peonies, you can always get them at a local nursery or greenhouse or something along that line, or even just mail order. They're very, very prevalent, very easy to find plants. This plant does have a spreading habit. Typically, a clump like this will spread to fill about anywhere between 3 to 5 feet in diameter. The herbaceous peonies tend to get about 3 feet tall. The tree peonies can get taller, sometimes up to 6 feet, but it takes them a long time. They are very slow growing. These plants generally prefer full sun. You will get the best growth out of these plants if you have them somewhere with full sun and loamy soil. They do need good drainage. They don't like having wet feet. They will grow anywhere in zones 2 to 8, horticultural zones. However, although full sun is best for growing, giving them some shade in the midday does help to preserve the flowers. I've actually heard that in Asia they'll like put little parasols over the peonies when they bloom in order to preserve the flowers for longer. The flowers, you can see a lot of my flowers here are kind of dropping petals. In full sun they'll last about 2 to 3 days, but if you give them a little bit of midday shade when they're blooming, they can last up to a week. So just there's that little caveat for you. Flowers obviously are very large, very fragrant, very fragrant. The smell is just heady right here, almost sort of a citrusy undertone to it. It's delicious. The flowers do benefit from some support. As you can see, how big the flower is in comparison to the stem. These flowers will actually weigh the plant down to the ground if you don't give them some support. So they sell peony rings, which are just special little metal rings that you can put in the ground to hold your peonies up. I get a little more creative and natural. I will take the cuttings from my apple tree, those little apple withes, and sort of bend them into hoops and put those around my peonies. And then they kind of lean on those sticks instead of falling all the way to the ground when they bloom. But they really do need some sort of support if you're going to grow them, herbaceous peonies in particular. Tree peonies can kind of stand up on their own because they have more substance to their stems, but they still oftentimes will benefit from some staking to make sure that they don't accidentally get blown over in the wind, and then you lose a lot of growth if that happens. So definitely give these plants some sort of support. The flowers come in numerous shapes and sizes. Like I said, this one is this is a Festiva maxima, which I think is a double flowering. There's like, I don't know, 8 different flower types, and I don't remember them off the top of my head. Typically peonies will grow in some shades of white, pink to like sort of like a almost purpley pink color. However, some of the Asian species will grow yellow flowers as well, and of course some of the hybrids will have those same yellows as well. They are deer resistant, so if you live somewhere that has deer, these are a good plant to plant. However, they do sometimes get some fungal diseases, so giving them some good air circulation helps with that. A lot of you are probably familiar with the ants that crawl on these little buds as they're getting ready to open. They don't harm the plant. You do not need to spray the plant with pesticides to get rid of the ants. The ants may actually have a symbiotic relationship with the peonies. The peonies do not need the ants to bloom, but it's possible that they attract the ants in order to have the ants fight off any other harmful insects that may try to eat the peonies. So leave the ants alone, they're fine. Don't bother them and they won't bother you. So this plant has some really interesting sort of mythology and folklore behind it. The name itself, Peony, comes from Peon, which was one of the students of Asclepius in the Greek myth. It's said that Peon, his student, was able to actually cure the wounds that the gods had suffered during the Trojan War. And Asclepius, of course, became jealous of this ability and the fact that the student may eventually surpass the master and become the greatest physician to have ever lived, and conspired to have Peon killed. Zeus intervened and turned him into the peony flower that we know and love. So, obviously this shows that there's a long history of this plant being associated with the medicinal arts. And this is talking, of course, during a time when the medicinal arts and the magical arts were basically intertwined, the same thing. So there's no real medicinal uses for this plant, but obviously the medico-magical use, yeah, there's a lot there. Peonies, interestingly enough, although Culpepper associates this plant with the sun, in folklore they're said to grow in places where the emanations of the moon, the light of the moon, struck the earth. So Culpepper gives them a solar affiliation, but folklore, they would have more of a lunar affiliation to them. They were also said to have sort of an eerie glow in the midnight, particularly the seed pods. In the moonlight they would glow, and they would be said to be protective, sort of a protective beacon for shepherds who were lost in the night and things like that. A lot of protection association with this plant. Protection against evil, malign spirits, storms, ill fortune, all of these things were associated with the peony. The seeds and roots in particular were considered to be the most potent parts of this plant. It will form, if you're lucky, it will form these big seed pods that look sort of like horns coming out of the center of where the flower was. And make these big, really dark sort of mahogany black seeds that are good size, you know, like a large pea in size. Those seeds were actually strung onto a thread and either enchanted under the moonlight or in rainwater, and then used as a necklace, a protective charm to protect children from the influence of evil spirits. Obviously there's nothing saying it can't protect other people from the influence of evil spirits. I'm sorry, my notes are just flipping here in the wind. Let's put those down there. The roots, of course, could be dug up, long tuberous roots that it has, and they would typically have sort of like bulbous appearance to them. They would either just dry the roots and, you know, cut them into coins and string those on thread, or even possibly carve them into beads and use that as a protective charm as well. One of the things that this was used medicinally for, again, doesn't really have a real medicinal use, but it was used to cure lunacy. It was said that anyone who was just affected by the moon could wear one of these protective charms of peony and would be cured. It was also said to be protective of nightmares. So a lot of really, you know, lunar protective aspects to this. Really cool, interesting plant, and just gorgeous. I mean, yeah. I'm going to take this little flower inside, cut it right here at the base of the stem, and just float it in a bowl of water. I've heard that it will last a lot longer if you do it that way, so we're going to give that a try. Bring that protection into my home. So anyway, gorgeous little plant. I think everybody needs to have a peony. If you have a yard, you should probably have a peony, and you can probably find one from a friend somewhere. So yeah, it's a great plant to share. So anyway, that's all I have for you on this little plant. Hope this video finds you well, and I will see you again soon.